Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, July 14th, 2020, Dars highlights. I only know my murids by the illusion, through the ishara. I don't know your name, I just know your ishara. And if you lose that illusion of the nur, then I don't recognize you anymore. When you come to the Shaykh, he asks you about your job and your marital status in order to shorten your path, in order to teach you the mansions, al-manazil, in order for you to arrive at the planet, al-kawkab, so that we may teach you guidance. بِالنَّجْمِ هُمْ يَهْتَدُونَ, by the star they are guided. But if you lose the ishara, the illusion, the nur, then you're just like a sift, you're a ghurbal, and you serve to expel people who are not worthy of this path so that they may leave as well. When we were under training with our sheikh, there were few murids, hardly any murids at all. It was just his home. We would go to him. We never asked him a question. We were too embarrassed to even ask. And in fact, we'd have a question in our heart, and we'd use a word that the sheikh would say and interpret the answer to our question with the sentence that the sheikh uttered. And we would leave his home, and when we missed him, we would return back to the sheikh. We don't turn to other murids, not out of pride, but out of fear for ourselves. It was just us and our sheikh. Now, when the sheikh deposits the nur in you, it's like a delicate snowball, and others around you are like heat and they'll melt it. Murids will praise each other, they'll say, you're luminous, you're munawwar. This is the worst thing that could happen to you. When you have tahara, when you are truly pure, the sheikh will tell you, now go work on others, go to this spot and go purify them, because that won't harm you. Think of it this way. The sheikh lights your heart. He places in it a delicate candle, but you're the one who has to protect it from the wind. If the candle blows out, you'll come back to the sheikh and he'll light it again for you, and you go back again. But if that keeps occurring 2 or 3 times, there comes a point where the sheikh will say, just go away, you're too young to have a candle. Let's wait for your older brother to show up, maybe he'll know how to hold it. It is to this effect that Sayyiduna Musa alayhi salatu salam, he said, Burika man fin nari wa man hawla. Blessed is the one in the fire and the one around him. In other words, Musa is protecting the blessing that's in his heart. And he pulls out his hand and it's white. Bayda lin nadirin, white like a luminous candle. Then he is sent to the Pharaoh. And even then he's told by his Lord, after the years of training with Shu'aib and the encounter at the burning bush and so on, he's told, go to the Pharaoh and speak softly. قَوْلًا لَيِّنًا. As for you, you insult Muslims, to say nothing of how you would speak to the Pharaoh. So protect the candle around your heart. Avoid excessive chatter with other murids. And when the sheikh asks you to testify to the nur, to put a shahada, he's saying, do da'wah on my behalf. Just convey one verse. Just convey the verse of light. Go out and say the verse of light is real. Don't say more or less, because the more you speak on your behalf, the more prone you are to making a mistake. And when you have permission to speak, then you should speak on my behalf, and don't add or change my words. Place the words that I have expressed exactly how I said them. The barakah resides not in beautiful speech, but in the flow that's deposited in the sheikh's words. This is why the sheikh can recite the ayah of al-bay'ah, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يُبَيْعُونَكَ إِنَّمَا يُبَيْعُونَ اللَّهِ. He reads the same ayah that you read, and you see the nur, because it's in the heart. The affair dwells in the sheikh's heart, not in elaborate, fancy expression. Then there was 2 fuqara from Casablanca who had long lists of questions, excessively long, And he said, these are too many, and we're not going to answer any of them. Just speak of one of your disclosures or visions. Don't show off with all your tajallis. There was a male and a female fuqara, and he said, you're both, I'm not going to answer any of these because there's a trace of wanting to show off here. And then the Shaykh says, I would never answer or interpret dreams for the fuqara. I would only interpret visions if it were not for the fact that the Prophet ﷺ would say, has anybody had a dream? If it weren't for that hadith, I wouldn't explain your dreams to you. I'd say, go to Google, I'm not Nabulsi, go look it up yourself. I would only ask for visions, for mushahadas at the station of ihsan. But thanks to this hadith, I ask you about your dreams out of mercy. But the standard remains direct mushahada, direct vision. Then the Shaykh concluded the dars as he has been doing now since the tariqah entered into Lam al-Ishq by commenting on Surah Taha, verse by verse. And he's reached verse 8. The Taha, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Taha, Ma anzalna alayka, we did not send down the Quran unto thee for you to become distressed, only as a reminder unto those who fear God, a revelation from He who created the earth and the high heavens. The compassionate or the all-merciful Ar-Rahman mounted the throne. Unto him belongs whatsoever is in the heavens and whatsoever is on earth, whatsoever is between them and whatsoever lies beneath the ground. And if you speak aloud, verily he knows what is secret and what is more hidden still. God, there is no God but He. Unto Him belong the most beautiful names. Hath you heard tell of Moses, when he saw a fire, and said unto his family, stay here, verily I perceive a fire. Perhaps I shall bring you a brand therefrom, or find guidance at the fire. In commenting on Taha, the disconnected letters at the beginning of the surah, he spoke of the purification of Ahlul Bayt, and he connected Taha to Ha'ul Huwiyah, the Ha of ipseity of the divine name, and to the verb liyutahhirakum, in order to purify the Ahlul Bayt, and the idea that God doesn't send down sciences in order to tire you, but to have a talaqqi, or a reception of the pre-eternal beauty of Allah, and that purification is acquired through love, and one can enter into Ahlul Bayt like Salman al-Farisi with pure love, if you purify yourself. And the ma'rifah that's acquired is through following. So the angels, for instance, they are commanded to prostrate. They only had knowledge of Subbuhun Quddus Nusabbihu bihamdika wa nuqaddisu lak. They only had two names, and then they're commanded to prostrate before the vicegerent, and Adam teaches them through that prostration. In that prostration, knowledge is imparted upon the angels by virtue of at-tabi'uka, following. Without tabi'iyya, without following, gnosis or direct knowledge of Allah does not exist. There's only memorization of knowledge, but that's not knowledge. Knowledge rests in the act of prostrating. That's where the angels are taught kulliyatul asma', the all-comprehensiveness of the names. And he spoke of the rigor of lamul ishq or lamul qabd, the lamb of love or the lamb of contraction, because you need it at every heaven. You need this ishq at every heaven until He loves you, until you have idhan. Then the Shaykh commented on verse 9, have you heard of the hadith of Moses? The Shaykh comments, Musa has hadith. Hadith meaning literally a saying or speech. Now what is a muhaddith? God's confidant here, his intimate friend Al-Khalil, is described as someone who has hadith. He's a muhaddith. He conveys speech from the living, in contrast to those people of exoteric hadith who convey speech through dead chains of transmission, transmitters who are dead. Musa conveys speech from Al-Hayy, the one who is living, the one who is alive. The muhaddithun convey speech through dead transmitters all the way up to the messenger who is alive at the low tree of the furthest boundary with the sublime companion, with Ar-Rafiq al-A'la, his Lord. God's word descends from the seventh heaven to the first heaven, to the earth, to the seven earths, to the seven souls. This is how the descent of the revelation takes place. And according to those who've realized the truth, the muhaqqiqun, the realizers, you speak of hadith when your breath becomes the breath of the Messenger ﷺ, when he flows through you, when you become the verse لَقَدْ جَاءَكُمْ رَسُولٌ مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ, a messenger has come unto you from your own selves. If his breath doesn't flow through you, for the people of tahqiq, for the people of realization and verification of the truth, you're not a true muhaddith, because the muhaddithun are ahlul wilaya. If you look at the words of Sayyidina al-Khidr or the words of Sayyidina Ali. As for the jidar, for the wall that I broke down, Khidr says, مَا فَعَلْتُهُ عَنْ أَمْرِي, I didn't do what I did from my own command. I didn't do or say or leave anything. That's the ta'wil, the interpretation of what you couldn't bear patiently. Khidr has direct hadith, he has direct speech with his Lord, direct commands, and Musa needs those to be interpreted for him in ta'wil. That's a second step. And hence Sayyidina al-Khidr says aradtu, aradna, arada rabbuka, in relation to the three acts or the three stages of the path. He says, I wanted to puncture the vessel, we wanted to slay the youth, your Lord wanted to build the wall. The three stages of fana are described here, but there are also these three stages of hadith in the sense of being spoken to directly by God. And so the one who is a muhaddith is the one who can renew the ta'sil, the foundational principles of wayfaring. Just like a jurist can renew, he can do tajdeed with a specific case that is in front of him. A wali has permission to renew the act of puncturing the vessel and slaying the youth and so on, because the wali knows that behind that vessel there's a king, there's a tyrant, there's a shaitan that takes each vessel captive, each ship captive. يَأْخُذُ كُلَّ سَفِينَةٍ غَصْبًا. So once and after the appetites are punctured, and once they're overcome, then the disciple becomes like a child. The Shaykh indeed finds his experienced disciples like children. He places a subha around their neck. He sends the murid on siyahas, he puts them in khulwas and so on, until the murid becomes like a small child. He says, sit, the murid sits. Stand, the murid stands. Stay still, he stays still. And yet, the murid still has to be killed, because it has a nafs. Then the knowledge of the wall and the concealment and the two children, Hassan and Hussein, with their righteous father, becomes inherited and transmitted. So the muhaddith for esoteric wayfaring is the one who takes their command and their prohibition directly from God. That's a muhaddith for the ahlu at-tahqiq, those who've verified the truth, the people of realization. وَهَلْ أَتَاكَ حَدِيثُ مُوسَى, and has news of Hadith Musa reached you? God's words on the tongue of Musa, acted out through his deeds and with his affirmation and on his tongue. What hadith? Musa sees a fire and says to his family, stay here, I may find guidance on that fire. Musa has a disclosure of al-haq, of the real, and he says, I see the star of the Prophet ﷺ, and with that star that I follow, there's always huda, ma dhalla sahibukum wa ma ghawa. When najmi idha hawa, when the star rises, your companion does not go astray. And likewise, Sayyidina Musa sees the fire and he says, I'll find guidance upon that fire, because now I've had the disclosure of the star. He saw the star of the chosen one in the fire, and he wants to bring guidance back to his family with permission, with his pledge, with his bay'ah. For those who are married, if your wife is not interested in the guidance of the path, well, first, she's not Musa's wife. She's not at the state of Musa's wife, the daughter of Shu'aib. But you should live with her in beautiful companionship and call to her, invite her to the path through your deeds. Invite your spouse through your spiritual state. If your spouse sees you waking up and finds you in prayer, they will follow you. But if you're snoozing away and then you wake up the next day and pretend to be Umar ibn al-Khattab, if that wife doesn't give you a slap on the face, she's not a true woman. Now, returning to Hadith Musa, the speech of Musa, this isn't verbal utterance. It's إِذْرَاءَ نَارًا. He sees it. He has a direct witnessing of the Najm. Mushahada is involved here. For the exoteric scholars, hadith occurs with the ear. Rasulullah said this, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Rasulullah said that, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. What is the chain of transmission of Musa? What's his sanad? It's direct witnessing. إِذَا رَأَى نَارًا. When he saw the fire, he had that disclosure. If you speak of esoteric knowledge, you need your chain. And your chain, your sanad, is mushahada. Sayyidina Musa ﷺ takes hadith from Shu'aib, 10 years of wayfaring, of training. And then from his Lord, he has the tajalli. إِذْ رَأَى نَارًا. Now, when you, O murid, when you see a fire, and you go to that fire, you're not going to find your Lord. You're going to find bums sitting around it trying to heat up their dinner or something. Because there's bums within your heart. When Musa sees this fire, the tajalli, he goes there and he speaks to his Lord. Musa sees the fire, tells his family to stay where they are. Those who don't have bay'ah can still benefit from the barakah of the people of bay'ah. Even though the family doesn't see the fire, only Musa does. And his wife is the one who taught him how to herd sheep. She was raised in the desert with Shu'aib at his hands. And Musa was raised in a golden castle of the Pharaoh. Then he goes to live for 10 years under Shu'aib with training, a life of nature. And his wife is the one who shows him how to find pasture and green fields and how to work with his staff. The staff was given to him by Shu'aib. Who did Shu'aib use his staff? Who did he smack before he started training or smacking Musa? He was smacking his daughters with the staff. And now it's the turn of the daughters to smack Musa with the staff. She uses that same staff to train Musa that Shu'aib used to train her. And so Musa perfects the art of herding sheep. Then he sees the fire. And upon seeing it, he doesn't forget his wife. He doesn't forget the grace by which he came to that tajalli. She's the one who taught him wayfaring. And upon seeing this, he says to his family, Umkuthu, stay here. I'll bring you the guidance. I leave because I see the nur. Today I must attend to another affair, to a higher affair. You stay here, and I'll go to the light, because the light will keep me on the straight path. How can you stay on a path if there's no light? How can you know the sunnah if you don't witness the nur? Herein lies the difference between hadith that's directly witnessed with inner vision versus chains of transmission and reported tradition. To this effect, the Prophet ﷺ draws a line in the sand. You see the line, that's mushahada. He says, follow it with light. To walk on the path of Rasulullah, you need the living hadith, hadith of the living, hadith of al-hayy, to pass away in his presence. I become your ghaya, your qibla, everything that's most beloved, until I, Rasulullah ﷺ speaking, I become more beloved than all of mankind. So your heart has to witness it, and to witness your heart has to be cleaned. But your hearts are like old frying pans that you bought from an old market, from which your predecessors have eaten fish and they've enjoyed themselves. You have to clean it, and it needs fire. You have to scrub. The dhikr has to produce heat, and the heat must light. And if your dhikr is cold, you need to heat it with fikr, with active reflection, and with constancy, so that you can shine this old frying pan. Now, Ibrahim, likewise, he sees his way. He's in a khalwa. Don't say that Ibrahim, one of the ulul azm, prophets of resolution, he's a messenger, he's one of the top 5 prophets, Nabiyyun Mursal ulul azm. Don't place him in shirk and idolatry. He doesn't worship the star. He's in a khalwa and he has a tajalli in the malakut of the star, then the moon, then the sun, and says, Hada Rabbi. Musa sees, likewise, he sees the guidance from the tajalli. He's not going to the fire to worship the tajalli, to worship the disclosure. He's going there to get guidance. What's Musa's hadith then? When he arrives at the disclosure, he hears the hatif. He hears the spiritual sound. There's a tajalli, a disclosure of the nur first. First the nur discloses itself. Then he hears it, there's a hatif. And then God grants him proximity, qurb. And there's nur in the heart in the beginning. And nur to the right, nur to the left, on the horizons, in the ears, and so on. And now the tajalli is all around him. And he hears the hatif, that's wahyun ilham. It's the revealed inspiration from God. And he hears from the very heart of this disclosure, Inni ana rabbuk, verily I am your Lord. There's a descent of God's attribute of speech into the representation of his light, from which is deposited in his heart, and he hears the call. This is hadithul hayy. This is the speech of the living. This is what all of the awliya say. Then he's told, take off your shoe. The staff is your inheritance from Shu'aib. You use it to guide your own self, just as the shirt of Sayyidina Musa is inherited from Ibrahim to Yaqub to Sayyidina Yousef. The shoes, however, as the commentators say, is the dunya and the akhirah, the here below and the hereafter. And the guidance is to remain on the straight path. Even in Jannah you say it. Even in the hereafter, there's guidance and there's worship. The worship differs. The worship in the hereafter, in the garden, is Salamun qawlan min Rabbir Rahim, peace, a word from a merciful Lord. That's a form of worship. It's the prayer of the people of the garden, the inhabitants of Al-Jannah. That's the form of ibadah there. You're created to worship, and your createdness continues in the hereafter, and so your worship continues there as well. But the mode of that worship differs. Just as Sayyidina Adam in the garden, he was worshipping by teaching and learning the names, affirming Tawheed. And he descends into the here below to continue worshipping and knowing the names. How would you know the name? I was sick and you didn't visit me. There's no hunger or sickness in the highest level of Al-Firdaus. So he must learn those names by descending down here. These names and attributes of God are also for takhalluq, one can acquire them. Nudiya ya Musa. Musa is called. The nida, is it for close or is it far? It's for those who are drawn close, those who have attained the disclosure. You hear the nida from your Lord, and you're told, Musa, you're standing on holy grounds. Innaka bilwadi al-muqaddasi tuwa. Take off your shoes. So strive to see the tajalli in your dhikr, while others are sleeping in the last third of the night, because others around you are sleeping. Even when they wake up, they're still sleeping. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali Sayyidina Muhammad kama sallaita ala Sayyidina Ibrahim wa ala ali Sayyidina Ibrahim wa barik ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali Sayyidina Muhammad kama barakta ala Sayyidina Ibrahim wa ala ali Sayyidina Ibrahim fil alamin innaka hamidun